And welcome to The Bottom Line, where we dig deep into the main business and economic stories of the day. The Central and Eastern European currencies like the Polish złoty, Czech koruna and the Hungarian forint have been weakening in relation to the euro and the greenback in the past week. As a consequence, the Hungarian currency is at its weakest level since the end of 2022. I'm now joined by Magdalena Polan, head of emerging market macroeconomic research at PGIM. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Great to be back.
So we've seen the Polish złoty go up to 4.32 to the euro today. So the Polish currency is actually weakening a little bit in relation to the euro, especially if we look at the past week. Can you tell us what is going on and what are the implications?
Absolutely. There is a little bit of an uncertainty and also a bit of a yo-yo with the data. So one of the major factors that drives currencies globally, but also here in this region, is what's going to happen with the interest rates in the US. And just 2-3 weeks ago, the US Federal Reserve, the Fed, cut interest rates by 50 basis points, and markets were expecting a rather aggressive cutting cycle. So that would mean that interest rates in the US would be getting lower, and interest rates in other countries would remain, let's say, stable, and the differential would work in the currencies other than the US dollar. But just last week, we had a series of very strong data in the United States, especially from the labor market and income. And that meant that the markets have changed their view on how much the Fed will cut interest rates. This means that the interest rate differential now and in the future will become more favorable to the dollar, and that leads to the weakening of the currencies. And of course, there is also geopolitics.
Okay, so everything that we see happening here at the moment is still very much dictated by what we see happening in the US.
So the US remains very important, especially when we think about the next months, 6 months, 12 months. That's, of course, not just the interest rates, but also the US politics and the elections. And then what's happening on the geopolitical stage in the Middle East, outlook for the price of oil. That all weighs on the Polish złoty and the currencies in the region, but there's of course the local fundamentals, but they will probably matter more in the longer term, or they limit or maybe amplify the size of movement in the exchange rates.
So I wanted to ask about the złoty and how we see it here in the country, because overall the perception is that the złoty is very strong, but I wanted to ask you to explain to us all the dimensions of what that actually means for the Polish economy from the bottom up. Who wins and who loses?
So let's say first that analyzing currencies is one of the most difficult and complex challenges for economists and strategists. And there's so many factors driving them within short term, longer term, medium term. And then saying that the currency is actually strong can have a number of meanings. But let's go and go what it means for everyday life. So stronger złoty means lower prices of imported goods. And especially for Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Turkey, this means lower oil prices and gas prices. That translates very quickly into the prices you see at the gas station. And now in the environment in which we really want to get inflation down in this region and globally, stronger złoty means better outlook for inflation. And also when we see these gyrations in oil prices, stronger złoty means that these jumps in oil prices can be offset by a stronger złoty. Of course, that also has some impact on the price of Polish exports, because if the złoty is more expensive, then Polish exports are a little bit more expensive as well. However, these old rules of thumb that you might have read in the economic textbook, which say weaker currency good, stronger currency bad, actually don't hold as well in the modern economy. When you think about, for example, about a car producer, almost 70% of the input for a car producer are imported. Mm-hmm. So it's really 30% that matters. And in this globally integrated economy, it's not as important anymore as it used to be in the past. So generally good for inflation, maybe a little bit impact on exports, but also makes the currency a little bit more attractive to investors from outside.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to just touch upon a little bit on the recent statements that we've been getting from the governor of the Polish National Bank, because there's been a lot of attention on that. Do you think that the statements that have been coming from him have shaped or impacted the value of the złoty in any way?
What's really important is the outlook for interest rates. We started our discussion with the Fed and that repricing in expectations that US interest rate will be higher than the market thought just a week or 2 weeks ago. Now, Polish Central Bank is offering us a more dovish guidance. What this means is that central bank signals that interest rates will be lowered earlier than we or the bank initially indicated. So what do we see here? We see expectations for US interest rates going up and expectations for the Polish interest rates going down. And that differential between Polish rates and the US rates in the future is getting narrower. And with lower differential erodes support for the Polish złoty. So it's going against the Fed, and that then undermines support for the złoty. Just remember that what the Polish Central Bank does comes as one of the many factors, right? So we have to see it in the context, but definitely that change in narrative from the Polish Central Bank added fuel to the fire of that sell-off that we've seen in the złoty and in the region.
Okay, now I want to move on to the regional currencies and the economies because the week just gone wasn't so great for them, especially for the Czech koruna and the Hungarian forint. We have our TVP World economic commentator Rafał Hirsch saying that the weakening of the forint is actually a consequence of the markets anticipating that there would be more monetary easing. And I wanted to ask you to explain to us perhaps their economic circumstances affecting their currency fluctuations.
So aside from being exposed to similar factors as Poland or Czech Republic, Romania and other countries here, there is an added complexity of Hungary not receiving as many funds from the EU as Poland and other countries do. This is the long-standing dispute with the EU, but also there will be a new central bank governor appointed or starting in March. And for the last few quarters in Hungary, you would see this occasional conflict between the government and the central bank. The government obviously would love to see lower interest rates, and the Hungarian central bank was defending a rather higher interest rate. So now, of course, we see the uncertainty over who is going to lead the central bank and what it means for interest rates. The governor will be appointed by the parliament. That's the parliament controlled by Fidesz, the same party that controls the government. So the expectations are for a more dovish person who would lead the central bank and possibly initially opt for lower interest rates, while maybe the cautious approach would call for somewhat higher interest rates. And that adds to that sell-off in the Hungarian forint.
Very interesting. And I wanted to ask you if you could just give us a little bit of your insight as to how the dollar and that situation is affecting these regional currencies.
So that's very interesting because in this region, the currency of reference is really the euro. And then what we see as a złoty, forint, Czech koruna exchange against the dollar is the product of the two. And currently the euro is not doing great. The European economy is really suffering that long slowdown and a little bit of the doldrums. And we saw just a month ago with the Draghi report, the effort to revive the competitiveness of the economy. So euro is not doing well against the US dollar. And sometimes there is this extra leverage, like an extra turbo charge that then weakens the currencies here in the region against the US dollar. So we're getting a little bit of a double hit, double whammy for the currencies in CEE.
We spoke about the oil prices earlier on. How does this really affect Poland? Does it affect Poland as much as we think it does? Because there's been so much discussion. Obviously, last week this was quite a hot topic.
It does, in the terms that it does affect inflation relatively quickly, because that's the market price. So, and let's say about 1/3 of the price is really the oil price. But it also affects the country and inflation expectations. So we think that we are rational, that inflation's expectations are rational, but in the end, it's the prices we pay for food, prices we pay for gas, and a few others that shape expectations. So as the central bank is trying to lower inflation, bring it back to the 2.5% target, against, for example, regulated price hikes in electricity, natural gas, oil prices and then gas prices at the pump are an important driver of those expectations. So if they go up, the general public, households may become more pessimistic about whether the central bank can really bring inflation down, and then may demand higher wages. Companies may shift their prices up, which makes fight against inflation, especially in services, even more difficult.
And as we see the Polish złoty strengthening, be stronger, however you want to word it, are we seeing more foreign direct investment already, or can we expect more of it? If so, what would you expect to see first?
Poland is getting quite a lot of foreign direct investment. I think 2022 was a record year. I'm not sure whether 2023 beat that record, but Poland is getting a lot. And also Poland is getting quite a lot of the EU funds and has a current account surplus. So picture cannot get better in terms of inflows into the Polish market. There are more people who are buying złoty than selling the złoty. So that's quite positive for the outlook for the currency, and that can encourage FDI. Obviously, what will matter a lot is the medium-term outlook, whether the country is still competitive, where wages are, where you can invest, can you actually hire people, do you have energy supplies to build new factory, do you have enough educated people, which becomes that medium-term driver of flows and then a medium-term driver also of the currency.
Okay. Thank you very much, Magdalena Polan, for being with us here
You're
today.
welcome. Thank you.
And Magdalena Polan of PGIM was my guest today. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Arena, and I was your host, Marie Cato. Join us every weekday at 5 p.m. CET on TVP World, and for more regional business stories, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. Coming up next, World Talks. Goodbye.